Hi mathematicians, in this video I'm going to show you how to write inequalities that have two variables in them. And in example number 1, Jimena and her children went to a restaurant and will buy hamburgers and tacos. Each hamburger costs $5.50 and each taco costs $4. Jimena has a total of $35 to spend on hamburgers and tacos, and it asks us to write an inequality that would represent the possible values for the number of hamburgers, H, and the number of tacos, T. Whenever you're trying to write an inequality, the first thing you should do is look at the constraint. And remember that constraint is the big kid word for a limitation. And in the limit, in the problem, we can see that she has a total of $35 to spend. So while I know in real life, we can typically spend more with credit cards and things than the total that we have, for our purposes here, we want to see what would be the way for her to actually stay under her budget. So the first constraint is going to be 35, and it's $35. And in order for her to stay under her budget, she can't spend more than $35. So if we look at our keyword chart, to stay under budget, she can spend no more than $35, which means we're going to use the less than or equal to symbol. So I'm going to put that, I'm going to say less than or equal to right here. And so then, since the constraint involves, and in this case, it involves dollars, and I know it involves dollars because it has the dollar sign. So because it involves dollars, my unknown quantities must also involve dollars. So that means that when I'm writing my inequality, I have to include the prices. So I have to include the fact that each hamburger costs $5.50 and each taco costs $4. It tells us to use the letter H for hamburgers. So since each hamburger costs $5.50, my first quantity, so my first amount is going to be $5.50 times H. And again, I got that because the hamburgers cost $5.50, and they told us to use the letter H to represent hamburgers. And then each taco costs $4, and they told us to use the letter T to represent tacos. So my second quantity is $4 times T. And then I'm just going to bring my inequality symbol, my less than or equal to, and my constraint down. So my finally written inequality is going to be $5.50 H plus, I'll make that plus a little bigger here for you to see that, 4T, $4 per taco, is less than or equal to 35. And we're done with example number 1. In example number 2, we have the same story. Jimena and her children are still going to a restaurant, but this time the constraint is a little different. It says Jimena is walking home and can carry a maximum of 10 hamburgers and tacos. So this time the limitation is 10, and she can carry a maximum of 10 hamburgers and tacos. We see the word maximum here on our keyword chart, which means I'm going to use less than or equal to for my constraint, for my limit. And this time the 10 doesn't represent money, it represents hamburgers and tacos. So my unknown quantities this time are only going to involve hamburgers and tacos. I am not going to include, I'm not going to include the money. So I'm not going to include the prices of $4 per taco and $5.50 per taco because my constraint this time does not involve money. So the money should not be part of my inequality. So this time, my unknown quantity is my number of hamburgers, which we already know from the previous problem is H, plus my number of tacos, and it must be less than or equal to 10. And that is all for our second inequality. So the big idea behind these two examples is that you should first start with the constraint, and that will help you figure out how to write the rest of the inequality. If the constraint, as we had up here, involves money, then you do need to use the prices that were given to you in the problem because it involved money. But down here in our second example, since the constraint did not involve money, we did not use the money. It was just extra information in the problem. Now I'm going to ask you to pause the video and read problem number 1 and try to write your own inequality, and then restart the video when you're ready to see whether or not you have gotten it right. So I'm going to start by doing my constraint. I'm assuming you've gone ahead and tried to write this down. And in Zoe's situation, she must earn at least $120. So we're going to start with that constraint. Then I'm going to look at my list of keywords, and I'm going to look for the words at least. And at least is right here with my greater than or equal to symbol. So I'm going to write that part of my inequality. And then I know that 120 represents money. So that means that I also need to include the money values that are in the inequality. And she earns $10 an hour for babysitting. And it tells us to use B to represent babysitting. So that will be 10B plus she earns $8 an hour for walking dogs. And it tells us to use the letter D for dogs. So we're going to say 8D. So now we have our inequality written correctly. Okay, again, pause the video, try number 2, and then restart the video when you're ready, but I'm going to assume you've done that. So first, look at your limit. This time Zoe's limit is she can work no more than 12 hours total between both jobs. I'm going to look on my list of keywords and see that no more than is right here on less than or equal to. So I'm going to move that out of the way for a second. So less than or equal to 12. Now those 12 involves hours. So because it's hours, that means I will not include my dollar amounts because this constraint involved no money. So I'm simply going to use B for her hours of babysitting plus D for hours of walking dogs, and I know that the final inequality needs to be B plus D is less than or equal to 12. Finally, please try number 3, and again, check yourself when you're ready. So first I'm going to start with my constraint. Keyshawn is working 2 jobs and must earn at least $100 this week. We know from our inequality keyword chart, at least means greater than or equal. And because that $100 involves money, this time I am going to include the money. And it doesn't tell us what variables to use this time, so I'm going to be boring and just use X and Y. So that's going to be $25 an hour for tutoring. I'm going to use X to represent tutoring. and then $10 an hour for gardening. So I'm going to use y for gardening. So finally, my inequality is 25x plus 10y is greater than or equal to 100.